Recently, I did a video looking at Google Earth imagery before and after various catastrophic disasters. The goal was to try to give a different perspective and show these incidents in a different way than people may have seen them before. Now, in the comments section, there was a ton of really interesting ones that I didn't get to, so I decided to make a part 2 video, and that's what this is. Last time I talked about the terrible tornado that tore through Joplin, Missouri, but an equally terrifying one happened just a few years before in Greensburg, Kansas. The Greensburg Tornado touched down on the evening of May 4, 2007, and cut a 30-mile path through Kansas. It lasted for over an hour and had wind speeds over 200 miles per hour. It killed 12 people and injured 63 more. The thing that sets this one apart from some of the other ones, though, was that it was a direct hit on the small town of Greensburg. Over 95% of all the buildings in the town took damage, with most of them completely destroyed. Right now, we're about 10,000 feet over the small Kansas town of Greensburg in the year 2006. It's pretty unremarkable as Kansas towns go, but a population around 1,500. This is before the tornado, and now this is after the tornado. As I mentioned, 95% of the buildings received damage, and as you zoom further and further in, you can see just how much damage they all received. Virtually everything was completely wiped out. Unfortunately, unlike the Joplin tornado that I talked about last time, where the town was able to bounce back pretty well, this town hasn't been able to bounce back as well. 20 years later, much of the town is still open lots. Although some has been rebuilt, the population has been cut in half following this tornado. Hurricane Helene, the deadliest American hurricane since Katrina, made landfall last September. After reaching Category 4 status, the storm took a path through Florida, Georgia, and then South Carolina. It caused billions of dollars in damage to these states, but it wouldn't be until it reached North Carolina that it would be its most devastating. Although by this time it had weakened to a Category 1, it was still carrying with it a huge amount of moisture. It slowed as it passed over the mountains of western North Carolina, which led to unprecedented rainfall totals. Large areas of western North Carolina received over a foot of rain, with many areas even getting 2 feet. In isolated spots, rainfall totals exceeded 2.5 feet. When it was all over, the storm became one of the deadliest and most expensive in recent American history. Flooding was extreme across much of the South, and entire towns were changed permanently. For Hurricane Helene, I'm going to focus specifically on Asheville. If I wanted to make this a 4-hour video, I could go into all the different places that were affected across western North Carolina and some of the adjacent states. But for the purposes of brevity, I'm just going to look at Asheville. So this is after. As you can see, the floodwaters, all the damage that they caused. I'm going to go back to before. This area of North Carolina is very mountainous, so you have lots of gullies and mountains, and as you can see, it's just crazy the amount of mud and debris left over after the floodwaters receded. As I said, there's a whole bunch of other places, Chimney Rock and a bunch of other towns across North Carolina and some of the other states that got lots of damage as well, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to follow some of the places along the river in Asheville. And as you can see, all the places that have that tan color, that's all debris and residue from the flooding. Unfortunately, it goes pretty much along any creek, any river. They got so much rain that everything overflowed. Most of the incidents on this list are natural disasters, but these next two were hugely impactful man-made disasters. On July 6, 2013, a runaway freight train carrying crude oil derailed in the downtown area of the town of Megantic. The incident was triggered by a combination of substandard maintenance and lax safety procedures, combined with poor operator performance. The resulting explosion had a blast radius of over half a mile and resulted in the deaths of 47 people. 30 buildings were destroyed in the initial incident. At one point, long before this incident happened, a proposal had been set forth that would have rerouted the busy freight line around the town rather than through it, but unfortunately this was never acted upon due to cost constraints. Right now we're about 5,000 feet over the town of Lac-Megantic in Quebec, Canada. This area right here is the downtown district, the commercial area with the restaurants and things like that. And unfortunately, that's right where the train tracks run through and right where the derailment happened. This is the year 2006, so this is quite a bit before the incident, but now I'm going to skip ahead until just after the incident. And as you can see, this is right after the incident because the train cars are still there. All the damage from the fire and the explosion is very clearly visible. You can zoom out a little bit. And now I'm going to skip forward where you can see that all the buildings that were damaged had to be torn down. But then skipping further ahead, more buildings had to be torn down because of the resulting contamination. So this whole downtown section ended up being bulldozed. Now skip further ahead. Now this is about 5 years after. There's memorials and parks, but a lot of it's still open field. Now this is closer to present day. It's starting to get built back up again, but it's never really going to be what it was before. This next one is just awful. Regardless of where you stand on the politics of the issue, the conflict in Gaza is an absolute tragedy, and it's one that's hard to believe, particularly when looking at the satellite imagery. Triggered by the October 7th attack on Israel, the ensuing conflict has left tens of thousands dead and destroyed entire swaths of the Gaza Strip. So right now we're over top of the Gaza Strip. Gonna go back a little ways and zoom in on some of the areas that have been bombed most heavily. Now this is 2014, so this is before all of it started. Gonna skip ahead, and as you can see, whole sections just don't exist anymore. This is one where it's hard to understand exactly what's going on until you start zooming in further and further, and you realize that all these little gray blobs are rubble piles where buildings once stood. And then you sort of start to get an appreciation for the scope and scale of what's going on. And it's not one building or 50 buildings or 100 buildings, but it's thousands of buildings in every direction. This is just one section of one part of the Gaza Strip. Gonna skip backwards again. This is what it looked like. This was about 10 years ago in 2014. Now skip forward, and it's lots and lots of rubble piles. One of the things that's kind of crazy is there's no buildings undamaged in some of these sections. I mean, it's not like a couple bombs were dropped here and there. This is what it looked like before. That's what it looked like after. It's complete and utter destruction. And like I said, you can have your opinions on who started what and who's responsible for what and what the best solution is, but seeing this is pretty shocking. Going to zoom out. There's other sections of the Gaza Strip that have pretty similar things going on. This is another section that's been heavily bombed, and this is before and this is after. Another thing on the Gaza Strip that is a little bit, well, more than a little bit unsettling is the refugee camps. So that's what you go back before, and it's open fields, and then now you see all these little specks, and that's tents and just people trying to survive. One thing that's often left out when talking about the Gaza-Israel conflict is that the average age in Gaza is like 18 or something really low. I could be wrong with the exact numbers, but we're talking about a very, very young population, which to me makes it all that much more tragic that this is all going on. But like I said, as you can see, there's all these dots everywhere. It's just people trying to flee the place. It's just not a good situation. And hopefully all the potential truce talks or ceasefire talks will be successful. One of the worst wildfires of the last decade, the Camp Fire, took place in Butte County, California in November 2018. It's thought that it's triggered by a poorly maintained power line, which sparked a blaze, which was then exacerbated by dry, windy conditions. When it was all over, it would burn over 150,000 acres and result in the deaths of almost 100 people. Total monetary damages were estimated around $20 billion. The town of Paradise was completely devastated within just a few hours of the fire starting. Nearly all of the town's buildings were burned to the ground. This is looking at Paradise, California, the site of the Camp Fire. And Paradise was particularly vulnerable to the kind of damage that it sustained because it's such a densely wooded area. The houses are all intermingled with the trees, which is great as long as you don't have a fire. It's probably beautiful scenery and that sort of thing. As you can see, all the houses are right in the trees. This is September, just before the fire. And then if we skip ahead, Actually, one of the images shows the smoke from the fire, so this was the day of the fire itself. Obviously, you can't see a whole lot, but then this is after. And like I said, you can see in all the trees, some of the trees are still standing. The trees are a lot more resilient than houses are, but you can see all the rubble piles and piles of ash where all the houses used to sit. And this just goes on and on and on. There's an estimated 19,000 buildings that were burned to the ground in this fire. Here's some buildings that survived. The ones that were away from the trees and surrounded by roads and parking lots had a little bit better chance of surviving, but all the ones that were deep in the trees basically had no shot because there was just so much fuel around for the fires to burn. And if we zoom out, you can start to get an idea of how far this went on. It, like all the other things on this list, it wasn't just one section of one little area. It went on and on and on. Here's another one. If we go jump back in time before the fire, this is what it looked like. And now if we go back ahead, lots and lots of houses burned to the ground. Usually when you're talking about measuring precipitation in feet rather than inches, everybody would assume that you're talking about snow. But in the case of Hurricane Harvey, the rain totals were so high that it does make sense to describe them in feet. Much of the southeast Texas coast received over a foot of rain from the 2017 storm. But due to an unusual track of the storm essentially stopped for several days right on the coast, meaning that some parts of the coast got way, way more than a foot of rain. 2 and 3 feet were common in many places, while 4 feet of rain was not unheard of. The highest recorded rain total was in Nederland, Texas, where they got over 5 feet of rain, 60.58 inches. Right now we're looking at southeast Texas, specifically the Houston area. This was the area hit hardest by the hurricane. Over here is Nederland, Texas, the place that recorded 5 feet of rain. And the flooding in this one was so widespread that we're not going to be able to see even a fraction of it. But basically anywhere along a river saw extreme flooding. This right here is Rose City. And if we skip ahead till after the storm, you'll see that the whole thing is underwater. And you'll just be able to see how much wider the river got. Now this, like I said, took place anywhere that there was any kind of body of water, because when you dump 5 feet of rain on top of it, or even a foot of rain on top of it, you end up with severe flooding. So it also happened in downtown Houston along Buffalo Bayou. You can see where it's overflowed its banks, and was a lot worse in some places than others. But all in all, it was just major flooding over a huge widespread area. On September 11th, 2023, following a heavy rainstorm, a dam on Libya's northeastern coast burst, causing the uncontrolled release of 40 million cubic yards of water across a densely populated section of the city of Derna. Cracks in the dam had been reported going way back to the year 1998, and in the years since, numerous inspectors had raised alarm bells that there was the potential for catastrophic failure. Unfortunately, the storm in 2023 turned out to be the thing that pushed the dam past its limit. The official death toll is listed at around 6,000, but other estimates put the real number as high as 24,000. Counting casualties in this particular incident was challenging, as many of the victims were swept out into the Mediterranean Sea, never to be heard from again. But regardless of the exact count, it's bad enough to rank as the second deadliest dam collapse in recent history. To make this incident just a little bit more sickening, a curfew had been put in place the day before the flood, meaning that few people were able to evacuate the areas downstream from the vulnerable dam. Right now we're 20,000 feet above the Libyan city of Derna. This is the summertime of 2023. Now keep an eye in this section right here. As you can see, there's a dam over here, and as we skip ahead to the fall, that dam bursts, and the water came rushing out here and flooded this whole section. Unfortunately, lots of people and buildings and homes were just washed right out into the Mediterranean Sea. Now this is the before picture. I'm going to zoom in a little bit further to give a better perspective, and then this is after. And it's just complete devastation all across the whole coastal part of the city. On the previous video, I showed the devastation caused by a tailings dam collapse at the Brumadinho mine in Brazil, But unfortunately, that's not the only recent Brazilian tailings dam to collapse. The Mariana Dam disaster was not as deadly, with only 19 deaths and about a dozen non-fatal injuries, but it was actually much larger than the Brumadinho collapse in terms of material released. 44 million cubic yards of mining waste was released in the Mariana Dam disaster, almost 4 times what was released in the Brumadinho incident. This was equal to about 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of mud and mining waste. The wave of sludge made its way into the nearby waterways. From there, it traveled hundreds of miles, choking out plant and animal life until it finally dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. In the wake of this incident, billions of dollars in fines were paid, including by Brazilian mine operator Vale. But it's not clear that it acted as much of a deterrent because a few years later, the incident that I had previously talked about, the Brumadinho mine collapse, happened. It was eerily similar. This is a view of Brazil in 2015 prior to the Mariana Dam collapse. Right here is where you want to keep an eye. This is from July of 2015. Now if we skip ahead, this is several months after the incident, so much of the mud has had a chance to be washed away, but you can still see the path that it cut. Basically any low-lying spot, the mud flows found a way to get there, and then obviously the majority of it made it to the rivers, and then ultimately even hundreds of miles downriver you can still see the impact that it had. A 7.6 magnitude earthquake that struck Indonesia in 2018 caused large-scale soil liquefaction, resulting in major mudslides in the city of Palu. Liquefaction happens when partially saturated soil loses its strength due to vibration. This makes the soil that previously seemed solid and stable rapidly turn into a quicksand-like substance, behaving almost like a liquid rather than a solid. This is hugely problematic when it happens to the soil underneath a major city, and is exactly what happened in the 2018 Indonesia earthquake. Thousands were killed as mudslides broke out seemingly out of nowhere, and entire neighborhoods collapsed or were buried in the mud flows. This is the Indonesian city of Palu in 2018 prior to the earthquakes. Now if we zoom in and skip forward until after the earthquakes, you can see these brown sections. If we zoom in further, you can just see how devastating they really were. These are the mudslides that were caused by liquefaction of the soil. This is going back before they happened, and as you can see, there's all these houses and towns and fields, and then if you skip ahead, it completely wiped out this big mudslide. The soil became unstable when the vibration of the earthquake caused it to liquefy, and then as you can see, this is all the debris and things like that that was pushed down the hill by the mud. On Hawaii's Big Island, volcanoes are nothing new. In fact, the whole island's a volcano. But the eruption and ensuing lava flow that took place on the eastern tip of the island during the summer of 2018 caused damage to a level that hasn't been seen from a volcano in America for over 40 years. The eruption began in May, and over the next 3 months, it would completely destroy the small coastal town of Kapoho. It would fill in a nearby bay, cause close to $1 billion in damage, and in the end would create 500 acres of new land. Right now we're on the very eastern tip of the big island of Hawaii, and this is what it looked like in 2018 before the volcano erupted. Now this is what it looked like after. This one's a little bit less depressing than some of the other ones because it didn't kill anybody, but it did wipe out an entire town, which kind of sucks. But as you can see, this is what it looked like before. There was this little bay. It was well known for snorkeling and things of that nature. And then afterwards, it all just completely got covered by the lava flow. One of the cool things is that this actually added 500 acres to the United States. Between April 25th and April 28th of 2011, the United States experienced 367 tornadoes, the largest tornado outbreak in American history. One of the most significant and damaging of these touched down near Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and traveled for an astounding 80 miles, ending near Birmingham. The EF4 tornado had peak winds of 190 miles an hour and resulted in 64 deaths along with over 1,000 injuries. The lengthy path it cut caused billions of dollars in damage, at the time the costliest tornado in American history. Unfortunately, it would hold this title for just about a month, as the Joplin, Missouri tornado that I mentioned in the previous video would happen just a month later and take the title as the costliest tornado in American history. Right now we're over the city of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This is 2010, just before the big tornado hit, and this is just after it hit in April of the following year. As you can see, the path starts in Tuscaloosa, and the thing that's really crazy about this one is how far it went. It went over 80 miles, going from Tuscaloosa all the way to Birmingham, just destroying everything in its path. As we zoom in, you can see the destruction. I'm going to go back, and this is the before, and now this is after. And unfortunately, this path of destruction just went on and on and on and on. And I don't have the time necessarily to show the whole thing, but if I click forward, they actually have where you can track. They have the imagery available to track the whole path of it. And as we go north, it's this tan-colored spot among the green. And it's hard to tell from 15 miles high, which is how high we're looking at it from right now. But if you can see, as it gets to houses and things, destroyable things, they are fully destroyed, and then keeps on going. And at this point, we're now just north of Birmingham, Alabama, where it's still causing damage. It's still tearing houses down and snapping trees off like they're toothpicks. And finally, north of Birmingham is where it dissipated. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami was one of the worst natural disasters in recorded history, resulting in 250,000 deaths across multiple countries. The amount of energy released in this incident was unbelievable. The 9.3 magnitude earthquake could be detected on the opposite side of the globe and was so intense that it caused a measurable impact on the Earth's rotation. The resulting tsunami was seen thousands of miles away and reached a peak height of over 150 feet. Entire towns and villages were wiped off the map. Banda Aceh was one of the closest major cities and saw extreme damage. Although the waves it saw were only about 20 to 40 feet, they still traveled several miles inland, destroying virtually everything in their path. This is the city of Banda Aceh in Indonesia, and it's certainly not the only place that was affected by the tsunamis. The tsunamis affected dozens of countries. They were felt even on the western coast of North America. But this was one of the closest, largest major cities, and it's also one of the places that has the most satellite imagery available. So this is what it looked like after the tsunami came through. I'm going to skip back to before, and this, obviously the low-lying, close to the coast areas were the most affected. But I'm going to focus in on this section in particular. As you can see, all the houses, this was summer the year before, and then once the tsunami came through, it made its way several miles inland in this location with a wave 20 to 40 feet high and just wiped out everything in its path. As you can see, there's nothing left but foundations. All the houses, all the buildings have been swept away. And then as you go further inland, you can start to see all the debris piles and where these houses were torn from their foundations and just moved miles and miles. And it gives you an idea of the kind of power that this had. Like I said, this is one city. This is one of the cities that's most dramatically affected, but this happened basically the whole way around. Any coastline of the Indian Ocean experienced something similar to this. Again, go back in time. This is before, just dense houses, lots of fields, things like that. And then skip ahead, and it's just all been pushed away miles and miles inland.